So I'm thinking, if you took off in a hot air balloon and you're trying to make a fast getaway, like really fast, and then someone else got in another hot air balloon and followed you, what would that be like? Have you ever even seen that? Do you think that was a thing? Like, what I'm asking is, when hot air balloons were not a novel, oh, you go on a hot air balloon for recreation, when that was like a way to get around, do you think there was a hot air balloon hot pursuit? Steve Weiner here from GetRubix.com. This is the year for Windows 11. We are moving to Windows 11, and we're not going to do it with imaging. So because it's 2025 and it's been a while, I'm going to take you through an updated getting started tutorial for Autopilot. You don't get it? Like hot air balloon, hot pursuit. It's a dad joke? I disagree. I think anyone can enjoy that joke.
Solving for the modern workplace.
So if we're not familiar, there's tons of content, including mine, that go over it. Autopilot allows a Windows PC to be registered to your organization so that when it's shipped to you from an OEM, a reseller, whatever, it will boot up and know that it belongs to your organization. I'm going to show you that out-of-box experience. The whole idea is users can sign in. Think about a smartphone. Sign in with your credentials. In this case, it'll be our corporate Microsoft 365 credentials, and everything will provision, including apps, policies, wallpapers, settings, whatever it is you decide to push down to the device. The idea is we're now provisioning the device from an out-of-box state to a production-ready state, as opposed to wiping and loading a corporate image. I'm going to show you some of the fundamental things you need, but of course you're going to want to make sure Intune is configured exactly the way you want, because you can't really have a good Autopilot deployment with nothing in Intune. All right, so let's start first by prepping our device, because it does take time to register a device in Autopilot. The best way to do it is, I'm using a virtual machine here. You can use an out-of-the-box physical device, doesn't really matter. You're going to hit Function Shift F10 at this screen. Now, if you can be connected to Ethernet, that's pretty good. If not, you're going to proceed through the settings until you connect to the network, because you do need internet connection for this part. I'm connected through Hardwire, so I'm good to go. Function Shift F10 opens the command prompt, and we're going to type in PowerShell. Okay, I'm going to recommend setting the execution policy to bypass, and you could even do the scope as the current user. Yep, did I hit that wrong? Current user force. That'll make it so obviously we're not bypassing it for everybody. And this is the process I'm going to show you here is for testing. To register hardware to Autopilot at scale, like you're deploying hundreds, thousands of devices, you work with wherever you purchase the laptops from for that. This process is purely for testing for yourself. So we're going to install the Autopilot script. It's going to be install script name get Windows Autopilot info force. Now, you might be prompted to install NuGet as a package provider. You might be prompted to accept certain things. Just go ahead and accept whatever you need to install that script. I'm going to clear the screen because I already have it installed. And once we have that there, what we're going to do is we're going to get Windows Autopilot. We're going to run it. Get Windows Autopilot info.ps1 dash. Now, this parameter is very important. This is called the group tag parameter. Well, what exactly is a group tag? So I'm going to head to Intune for a moment, and we're going to explain exactly what that is. If I go to my Autopilot devices, which could be found in Intune in Devices, Enrollment, and then down here, Devices under Windows Autopilot. These are all my devices, and you can see this group tag column. Some of them say M365, some of them say ZTAI. I have some, different ones here. Basically, the way the group tag works is you have an attribute that is kind of a wild card when you enroll the device in Intune. So let's say I choose a group tag called WinAP Corp for Windows Autopilot Corporate Build. It could even be something simpler than that. What I can then do is I can make an Entra group, like you can see down here, to look for that group tag. The purpose of this is once that tag is set to the device, I can begin to make groups on it before it even physically exists, right? Once it's in Entra, I can group it. That's going to be really helpful when we want to deploy things like, apps and policies to different kinds of builds. Because what that means is, let's say I have in the future a build for my kiosk devices, I can give them a tag of WinAP kiosk. That way, they're going to inherit straight into that kiosk group and not be part of my corp group. But the way dynamic device groups work, I can still capture everything registered in Autopilot by doing a contains or starts with the beginning of the tag. And of course, the goal there is going to be to determine what apps and settings go where. Right? This is often a question I get when folks are moving from a traditional imaging model to autopilot provisioning. And this tends to be the answer to it, right? You determine what policy and settings should be deployed across the board, right? To all devices. Then you should determine what specifically goes to certain builds. And again, that's for both apps and policies. For more on group tags specifically, I did a 5-part blog post on it. I'll put the link below so you can check all that out. That's where those images are from. And I go pretty in depth to that. But for now, we're going to think of a simple tag that we're going to want to use for our devices. So for these purposes, I'm going to tag mine M365 just to keep things simple. And my last parameter is going to be online. Now you are going to need permissions to approve this. Basically what this is going to do is going to allow you to authenticate into your Microsoft tenant to upload this device directly to Autopilot. So I'm going to sign in with global admin credentials, rubixdev.com. And if this is your first time running it, it's going to ask you to accept the permissions. And there you go. You can see it being imported. And this will take some time. So the recommended thing to do here is to upload it to Autopilot. And then once it's imported, we're going to power the device down so that it can properly assign things. While we're waiting for that, we're going to create a new group. And that's going to be a dynamic group to catch all those devices in the group tag. We can call it M365 devices. We're going to click under membership type. It's going to be dynamic device. So we're going to add a dynamic query. And just stick with me here. We're going to type this exactly as I have it here. It's going to be parentheses device physical IDs any underscore starts with, and it'll be in quotes order ID, and we're going to put our group tag right here. So whatever you decide to put there is going to be your that's going to be your tag, right? Let me zoom in a little bit there so you can see what I did. So this is what we're using. This will capture any device I've tagged, and then you go ahead and hit OK, and you can save that and create the group. So this is my M365 devices group. I have quite a bit in there because I've been using it for some time. But the really nice thing is all these devices get thrown into this group just by existing. So let's see if this is complete yet. It is. Okay, so the serial number starts with 5955. I'm going to go ahead and shut this device down. We're going to go take a look back in our Autopilot devices. Enrollment, scroll down to Autopilot, we go to devices, and we're going to look for 5955. There it is. So it's registered, and take a look at the group tag. It's already there. Now, if I were to go to that group, the device should already be a member of the group, or at least shortly. Oh, yep, it's the first one there. So see, by using the group tag, we're able to take the device before it even exists in here and make sure it's in the right group. And that's going to be important here when we talk about the enrollment profiles. So an Autopilot enrollment profile tells the device how to behave during Autopilot. For that, we go to Windows, Enrollment, and you can see deployment profiles. Now I have quite a few here. I'm going to create a new one and click Windows PC. And you can call it whatever you want. Standard, profile, I call mine default. Convert all targeted devices. So if you assign this profile to non-autopilot devices, it'll essentially register them for you. There's other ways to do that too. For the purposes of this, we're just going to skip this part. So here's really the meat of the profile. Deployment mode, user-driven or self-deploying. User-driven is what we want. Self-deploying would be more for like a kiosk or a shared device. Join to Microsoft Entra ID. We want Entra joined. We've talked about this in the past, but if you're new, the hybrid join option really is not optimal, doesn't work as well. A lot of extra pieces to make that work, and also very little benefit. Like I said, it's 2025. We're moving to modern, we're moving to Windows 11, we are moving to Entra join for your device. And I generally leave everything else on default, right? You get to hide all of those out-of-box screens you would typically get during a consumer experience. That's the point of Autopilot. You get to hide all those. Hide the privacy settings, hide the software licensing terms, hide the ability to change the account options, meaning you can't, sign in locally. This is an Autopilot device. You have to use your work credentials. Probably the most powerful is this user account type. Just because this is the first person to log into the machine, you can still restrict them to standard user. So that's absolutely what you're going to want to do there. So pre-provisioned deployment is another component of Autopilot. If you want the device staged first, you can have it run through by itself, deploy apps and policies to it before the user gets it. This is something we'll cover in the future, and I may have covered it already. For our purposes, we're not going to use it today. Setting the language and the region and the keyboard, I generally tell it, I just leave the defaults, right? In this case, I tell it to use the language based on the OS. If you have a situation where you want to specify a specific language or region for this device, you can absolutely do that here. They're all listed here, but I'm going to leave mine on the operating system default. And the device naming template. So with modern management, with Intune, with Autopilot, we don't name the whole device, we give it a prefix. So generally what I will do is I will do M365 dash, and then I will put in serial. So it concatenates the serial number to fit that 15-digit device limit. Sometimes I do zero touch, so Z0T dash. You could either do serial, you could also do random, like random 4 or 5 digits. Let's go look at my actual profile and see what that is. We can discard that. So in my profile, I'm going to set it to M365 serial. I'm going to save that. So what I've done is to control who gets this profile, we go to our assignments and I target it to the M365 device group. This is the same group that we're pulling in based on that group tag. So you see, this gives us a very automated flow. A device is tagged when it's registered, it goes into an Entra dynamic device group, and the Autopilot profile automatically is assigned to that group, which means if we go back and look at the device, it's going to have an Autopilot profile already assigned to it. So if we go back to our Autopilot devices and search for our device, 5955, we can see it's been assigned. If I select it, it's been assigned the default M365 Corp profile. So that's going to be all ready to go. But before we actually deploy it, we have to make sure Intune policies and apps are applied to it as well. Most likely you have a lot of Windows configuration policies that are already assigned. Make sure they're assigned to the appropriate group, whether that's all devices or it's the specific dynamic group based on our group tag. So I'm not going to go over all the configuration settings you could possibly have, but I am going to show you some ones that I'm going to assign to our devices that are very critical for a successful Autopilot deployment. All right, the first setting I'm going to show you is we're going to create a new policy, and we're going to go to Windows 10 and later and the settings catalog. And we're going to create. This is going to be called Disable Windows Logon Animation. The Windows Logon animation you've seen probably a lot of times. It's that slow strobe effect where Windows says, we're happy you're here, getting things ready. We can absolutely skip that in a corporate deployment. So you're going to actually search for animation in the catalog and go down to Windows Logon, and there it is, enable first login animation, and we're going to turn that off. And you can go ahead and assign that to your device group. The next policy we're going to add for Windows 10 and later is going to be a template, and it's going to be a custom policy. And this is going to be called skip user ESP. This is going to make a lot more sense in a little bit, but essentially when Autopilot enrolls and we have our enrollment status page, which is tracking everything, it's 3 parts. It tracks the device preparation, the setup, and then the account setup. The account setup tends to be somewhat buggy and slows us down, and usually very little need for it. So we're going to skip it. And the way to skip that is with a custom policy. So we're going to call it user ESP. Description is skip. And this is going to be a custom OMA URI policy. And I'll put this in the description below. We've covered this a lot on the channel. But I'm just going to make sure we do it here and you can see it. Microsoft DM client provider MSDM server first sync status skip user status page, and that is a Boolean that is set to true. And you can go ahead and now save this policy and assign it to your device group. The last thing we want to configure when we go to Windows enrollment, and we're here in the enrollment settings, automatic enrollment. As I've said many times, this should be set to all. If you feel the need to restrict it to some users, you can. That becomes complicated later because you're always keeping track of it. The better move here is to switch this to all and then block personal devices from coming in via restrictions. What do I mean by that? If you go to device platform restriction and we look at our properties here, you see you have the ability to block personally owned Windows devices. So you would absolutely be able to turn that off if you put Autopilot enrollment on all. So I would definitely recommend that. The last piece of the puzzle here is the enrollment status page. So the enrollment status page determines what you're going to wait for when you're going through Autopilot. So I'm going to create one specifically for my M365 devices. And let's take a look. So we want to turn it on. I would recommend leaving the timeout at 60 minutes. Most Autopilot deployments shouldn't take that long, but obviously you can set this to whatever you want, and you'll see why in a second. You can set a custom error message if the time limit should happen and we're not done yet. I recommend leaving a lot of these defaults on. So turn on log collection, yes. Only show page to devices provisioned by out-of-box experience. Yes, that means we're only showing this to Autopilot devices. Block device until all apps and profiles are installed. We're going to leave that on, yes. We don't want a user going to the desktop if it's not ready yet. Allow users to reset. I think that's fair. If there's a problem, we can instruct them to reset. We do not want them to use the device if there's an error. That means something went wrong. Probably the most important part, though, is the block device use until required apps are installed if they're assigned to the user and device. We're going to turn that on selected. This part is very important because it can make or break your Autopilot experience. I want to be very clear. The apps you're going to select here, this is not you assigning an app to a device or a group. This is saying if the device is assigned, when it's coming down during Autopilot, I want it to be one of the apps that Autopilot waits for. For example, if I'm pushing Office, Chrome, Adobe, Firefox, Notepad++, and in here I only select Adobe Acrobat, they're all still going to get deployed to the device. But the enrollment status page is only going to track Adobe Acrobat and then let the device through the desktop while the others install. So this literally just determines our out-of-box experience. So the less apps you're going to put in this stage right here, the faster you're going to be at the desktop. So it's going to be a balancing act. What do we need here that's critical to our experience? And what applications can wait until after the user's on the desktop, can either come down in the background or the user can download self-service through the company portal. So in our case, we are going to hit select apps, and obviously we have all our apps here. I'm going to choose a few that I know I want. Autopilot branding is my customization scripts for Autopilot. The only other one I want is company portal in this case, because then the user can go get what they want. I can see a world where you're choosing, not Office 365, Microsoft. Let's see. What is Office called nowadays? There it is, Microsoft Apps for Enterprise. So if you want to do, those would be your Office 365 apps. If you wanted to push anything else specific, maybe you had a, you have antivirus you want to push there. So my recommendation is keeping this between, I'm going to say anywhere from 3, 5 to 8 apps max. I think 3 to 5 is good. 8 is pushing it. But I'm going to leave mine on 2 just for the demonstration here. So I'm going to select that. We're going to hit next. I'm actually going to turn that to no. We're going to hit next. And now who is this being deployed to? We can target this to the same group that we have collecting our tag devices. Excellent. Okay, so our autopilot settings are there. We've made sure all our Intune configuration and apps are assigned, and we have the enrollment status page. The device is uploaded. Let's go through the out-of-box experience and see if everything worked. So one thing I do want to note before we proceed, because I get this question a lot, if I were to type WinVer, you're going to see that this is a Windows 11 Pro operating system, and because everything ships with Pro, this is going to be the most viable test. And what we're going to do is we're going to assume the user license of Windows Enterprise that's included in, like, you know, the E3 or the E5 suite. That's going to come in and flip the device for us, so we shouldn't have to do anything. So now as a user, we're just going to proceed. Skip the second keyboard layout. It would ask us for Wi-Fi, but because I'm plugged in, it's going to reach right out to the network, and it should see here that it belongs to a Microsoft 365 environment already. So because it found the autopilot profile now, it's going to go ahead and reboot, and that's going to deliver me the custom out-of-box experience. So now the device is coming back online. All right, so you can see it's taking me right to the autopilot sign-in, which means I see my corporate logo here. You can see I have no option to do anything else. I can't say use a local account. I can't say skip this. You have to sign in with corporate credentials. So we're going to use our favorite test user, Rick Jones at rubixdev.com. And we're going to put Rick's password in. Now, if you prompt for MFA, this will facilitate that prompt. I don't have it enabled at the moment, but it would absolutely allow you to use your, PIN number, authenticator app, whatever it is to authenticate here. So what it's doing, it's checking to make sure Rick is a licensed user for Intune. It's making sure the device is allowed to enroll because of our automatic enrollment settings. And what it's going to do is it's going to look for the enrollment status page that we configured, and that's what it's going to display to us. So this is the enrollment status page. Remember before I said there were 3 steps to it: device preparation, device setup, and account setup. So remember, account setup we're going to skip. And there's many reasons, like I said, about that. Again, that's just a lot of nonsense goes on with that. You're much better off skipping it. 9 times out of 10, when someone says I'm having a terrible experience, we turn that off and they're fine. So a little bit about what's happening here. Device prep is just making sure the hardware, if it has a TPM, it's enabled. It's going to use that for BitLocker. It's making sure there's an Intune registration, and it's going to go ahead and pull down. Actually, right now it's preparing for the next step, which is it's going to get a list of apps and policies that it needs to install. Okay, so with device prep completed, we're moving on to the second step. As far as security policies go and certificates, it applied one security policy. That's not like configuration profile, so it's not like it's going through and applying each one. Certificates, it will count. Network connections, it will count as well. And now it's going to go through identifying how many apps. So this should be 2 because we did set it to only keep track of 2. Yep, and there it goes, 0 out of 2. All right, so you can see 1 of 2 installed. It's waiting for the last application now. So, given how this works here, you can absolutely see, like, the more you have, if you want to wait for 10 to 12 apps, the user is just going to be sitting here longer. That's a fact. So my recommendation is always figure out the balance of what's critical, right? And what can come down later when up the desktop. Typically for folks, I would say, if a user's sitting here for maybe 15, 20 minutes, as long as we're communicating that, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if it means you get to the desktop with, your security software, Microsoft Office, company branding, whatever it is that the user can just start being productive. Company portal's another good one because then they can just go grab whatever apps they want. Okay, so there goes 2 out of 2 apps installed. We're skipping that third part, and we should go right to the login. That was about 7 minutes. I think I was sitting there. I didn't want to subject you guys, but I also want you to have a realistic sense of the time. So yeah, it took about 7 minutes for both apps. So not too bad. You can imagine if you had 3 to 5 apps, you're looking at closer to that 15-minute mark, depending on the connection. Now, this preparing for Windows, that was an absence of we're getting everything ready for you and all that stuff. Now, I have not disabled Windows Hello. I have it enabled here. So you can absolutely facilitate that for your users. I'm going to go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to get a text message and we're going to put that in. There we go. Create a pin, and I should be good to go for Windows Hello. Yep. Okay, so we're here on the desktop. All right, I'm just going to move myself out of the way to this side. Okay, cool. So we're at the desktop. You can see I have my custom wallpaper there, and I've shifted the start menu to the left. That's part of my settings. So kind of keep users more familiar. So it's not here, right? My search icon is just an icon. We have a nice clean start layout here. And you can see I also have some other apps, right? Greenshot, Notepad. And even though these weren't during the ESP, remember, that doesn't mean they're not going to come down. We're just not going to hold up the deployment for that. So no bloatware. That's all been stripped out as well. One important thing to note, if we go to settings and system, I'm going to go down to about. You can see here that it's Windows 11 Enterprise. So it did flip from Pro to Enterprise because Rick has the license. And I think the last most important thing is, even if other apps are coming down, I can still go ahead and open up the company portal. And, whatever I've made available to my users, they can go in and get it and start being productive. So if they want to, if they want to grab whatever, they can grab Adobe, they can install it themselves, they can look at the other apps. So whatever I've made available to them, they can grab and get that to start being productive. But, there we go. We're on a, fully corporate ready, productive device without imaging. And that's the whole point, right? It's 2025, and to say a computer is like a smartphone could be a very broad overstatement. I understand that, but it also kind of is, right? The device doesn't matter as much. We want just a productive, cloud native ready device so that the user can have their apps, they can start working. We make sure the device and the data are secure, right? As long as we have that, we need to move away from a lot of the old heavy lifting that goes into traditional imaging and group policy and things like that. But that's what Intune is for, right? So obviously a lot has to go into Intune, but in terms of if you're already managing with it and you want to start using Autopilot, which you should this year, especially for Windows 11, hopefully this will help get you going. And we'll be seeing you.